Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast, where we dive into real conversations with business owners, innovators, and industry leaders reshaping the future of clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sector. I'm Kreel Hutchinson, your host. Our guest today is Shawn Shaw, CEO and founder of Camelot Energy Group from Springfield, Massachusetts. Today, we're going to discuss the general trends facing the clean and renewable energy sector at the regulatory level, and how his consulting company is positioning itself to make the greatest impact moving forward. Welcome to the podcast, Shawn. How's it
Great.
going?
Great. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me, Creel.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, for our audience that may not know you in the work that you do, why don't you explain a little bit of your background, your role, and your company's focus?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been in the solar and storage space in particular for about 21 years now. I got a start back in 2004 when a typical solar project might have cost $15 a watt to install. And as you can imagine, back in those days, along with the dinosaurs I had to contend with, one of the things that was important to the industry at the time, especially, was the need for public incentives. There was no way a homeowner, even a really enthusiastic early adopter, could afford solar in most cases. So programs sprung up all over the US to provide incentives to folks. So I spent a lot of my early years supporting those programs. And one of the things that really, I guess, has guided me in that process is the desire to ensure not only that we build as many clean energy megawatts as possible, but more importantly, that they are effective and safe, and that we shepherd and build the public trust in clean energy. I've always felt that after the 1970s, we had a shot at a clean energy economy beginning then, but we faltered. We lost the public trust in the technologies, and we lost a whole generation of progress in addressing climate change. So many of my peers focus on deploying as many megawatts as they can, and that's super important. My little corner of the store, as I see it, is really to ensure that those megawatts are something that the everyday person in the street can trust as real infrastructure powering our society. So that's I've been an environmentalist since I was about four, uh, but I don't I'm terrible at biology, and I like science generally. That kind of brought me into physics and engineering, and that's kind of my piece of contribution, is trying to make technical topics make sense for folks in clean energy, and help those that are investing in clean energy do so without with as much risk mitigation as they possibly can have. So I founded Camelot in 2022 with that notion in mind, that we would work for investors, public agencies, independent power producers, and help them make smart investments in clean energy and make sure that those investments performed well, involved safe projects, and did what they were supposed to do so that people would keep investing in these important technologies and projects.
Amazing. You made a reference to the 1970s and like kind of the climate that was probably happening there and the opportunity to really like make bold decision making to really push forward clean technology. Compare that to what you see now. Is the climate ripe for that, or is there challenges? Where do you see things at the current state?
It's a great question, and obviously I'll answer from kind of a US perspective. If you were to take a global view, you might have a different answer. But here in the US, obviously, the current administration is a little bit, maybe a lot, you might say, less supportive of clean energy, and they don't necessarily see the value in it. But the fact of the matter is that the economics of clean energy have fundamentally changed. Many of these systems can stand alone economically without federal support in many ways, which has long been kind of I'll say, a dog whistle of sorts used by the fossil industry to say that clean energy relies solely on subsidies for its existence. That's less true now than it ever has been before. And in fact, if you were to compare the economics of generating electricity with a new utility scale solar project, it beats any of the fossil generation options. It certainly beats nuclear, and it can be deployed in months as opposed to years in most cases. So you're looking at at systems that are fast to deploy, They have benefits, significant benefits in the local economy. For example, the clean energy industry in the US now employs more than 6 times as many people as the coal industry. And yet, to hear sort of the rhetoric in politics and media, you would think it was the other way around, that solar is this tiny piece. So I think there's real opportunity here. I think there's a big critical mass behind it. I think we have some political connections. I think one of the things we learned in the recent One Big Beautiful Bill Act is that we remain a step behind the fossil industry in terms of our lobbying capabilities and our ability to wield political muscle. So despite the size of the industry and how significant it is, I think we're underrepresented in politics to this point. But yeah, I think it is different. But I also see some of the same underpinnings. Right now, about 15% of the developable land in the US faces some kind of development restriction imposed by local authorities on solar, wind, and or battery storage development. So moratoria or delays or other rigorous processes that have been put in place because we are seeing the public trust in these systems and technologies, I think, eroding a little bit, partly through misinformation, partly through our own, as an industry, our own, let's say, not always perfect development practices. Solar developers can be as guilty as any other type of infrastructure developer in rushing projects through local processes or not fully engaging local stakeholders. And that does build resistance to future projects. I've certainly been, project number 2 through X after that's happened. And it's very challenging to win back public trust if somebody came through before you and left a bad taste in the community's mouth. So, we've done a little of it to ourselves, certainly, but also there is some misinformation. The other big challenge we have is our interconnection processes. Despite a lot of good efforts to address this, they do remain poorly suited to the type of deployment scale and rapidity that clean energy has. We're looking at interconnection studies that can take years. It's 5 years between entering an interconnection queue and maybe being able to build a project when the actual building of the project can be done in 6 to 12 months. So there are real bottlenecks, and we need real focus on addressing some of the regulatory challenges. But I think renewables is in many ways in a better position than it ever has been to compete and do good things for the American people and economy.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. And most of our audience are going to be very familiar with those challenges because they're inside the clean tech and the renewable energy sector. And I think this last year, although challenging, has also been the opportunity for this industry to almost like mature and grow up and be able to stand on its own and realize, hey, you know what? We're actually here for the long haul, and the numbers make sense. The power demand that the grid that people are demanding is not going down but up. A common saying through all of our guests has been like all hands on deck. We need all energy viable options to be discussed at the table, and no winner is going to be the one that we choose. And all of a sudden that's going to be the savior. It's actually going to be a combination of them all coming together to help alleviate this demand, especially as we move into more of an energy consumption pattern with the influence of AI and data centers and so forth. So as you look forward, what are some of the major trends that are working for and against you at this time?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I really appreciate that. I know that the saying these days is an all of the above energy strategy, and certainly there's something to that. The problem is there's a couple of things that come to mind around that. So one is that I do frequently hear folks say that they still don't believe that clean energy is ready for prime time. They think that there is some new technology innovation needed. Oh, well, we just need to crack a new efficiency barrier in solar modules, or batteries need to fundamentally change. When solid state batteries come around, maybe then we'll be ready. We're ready now. Let's go. As Camelot, we're helping our clients build these projects. We're incredibly busy since the OB3 bill passed. I am not going to say that was a good bill, and I have dozens of friends who are out of work as a result of it. And we've personally lost some very significant contracts through the unilateral and arguably illegal cancellation of Solar for All grants. But that being said, the industry and that we're a part of, both of us, is really focused on deployment. So to the extent the OB3 has set some stiff timelines in place, that actually is getting people really locked in on placing projects in service as quickly as possible. And it's also changing the development landscape. The reality is that what OB3 took away from the industry in the IRA goes far beyond the subsidies. Everyone focuses on the 30% tax credit in the ITC and such. What fewer people realize is that the IRA was much broader and more impactful than that. It included things like retraining for folks working in the fossil fuel industry who would lose livelihood because of more clean energy. It included funding for installing projects in communities that primarily received their income from fossil fuel infrastructure. So there was a tremendous amount of work to incentivize the use and training of a whole new generation of electricians. Whether you like solar or not, we don't have enough electricians to serve an industrial society that is increasingly electrified and increasingly online. The average age for an electrician in Massachusetts, I believe, is something like 55. And as these folks retire, there aren't enough electricians to replace them. With folks now not needing to, not without having the ITC available to them, it is going to mean that projects have to survive without a 30% credit, but they also can use cheaper labor. They can forego a significant financing cost. So the 30% ITC came with it a pretty heavy cost of compliance and cost of financing. So you're not losing 30%, you're losing maybe 25% there because 4 or 5% of the project cost went into all the things you needed to do to claim the ITC. The lower labor, we can argue whether that's a good thing or not, because now you maybe don't have to use union labor. You don't have to ensure a certain number of apprentices are brought onto the project and trained in these technologies. So you're saving money. Like, we can build solar cheaper, but I think it's worth mentioning there was a reason we weren't before. And it wasn't because we couldn't, it was because we were trying to build a more sustainable business model for the whole society. So without the ITC in place and without the IRA in place, some of those ancillary benefits are going away, and I don't think that's been talked about enough. As far as barriers that we're running into, I think certainly workforce is part of it. We spend a fair bit of time doing thought leadership and trying to train folks. We do a lot with interns, but there is generally speaking, there are not enough qualified folks to build the infrastructure we need. And what we've got is not a situation where we're replacing lost solar projects that have been canceled with new gas generation, say. We've already factored that in. We're building as much gas as we physically can because there are no more turbines available for the next 5 to 7 years. Hitachi is going to perhaps expand their manufacturing capacity, but that's 2 or 3 years out at least and already spoken for. So I think one of the things that's important to understand is we've not replaced solar with, however you want to view it, maybe some people view it as better generation. We're just making all types of energy more expensive in the near future when our demand is rising for the first time meaningfully in 20 years. And not only is demand rising, more importantly, it's becoming more variable. People always talk about variable or intermittent renewables. Well, I have news for folks. Load is variable too. And the more we electrify HVAC and the more we add electric vehicles, the more we add even just data centers and our constantly online IoT type devices, that makes the load side incredibly variable too. And that's really where energy storage is a key player and where we do a lot of our work. Probably most of our work, honestly, is in energy storage these days.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think the game changer in the renewable energy sector, or one of the big determining factors, is now energy storage, right? It's kind of changed the conversation and allowed the idea of sustainability to be able to, like, hey, we can generate the power and we can keep it for when we actually need it, has really altered for many people what the future could look like. As you look into your business and the work that you guys are doing at Camelot, what are you seeing is working really well for you in your business or in the projects that you're on?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think for us, what we're doing a lot of work helping our clients build energy storage projects. So we call that owner's engineering. Functionally, it means our clients who might be, say, financiers or investors will bring us in to help ensure that the design is optimized, that the system they select the right equipment, they negotiate their contracts properly, and then ultimately will oversee the construction. But the big thing that I would say we've been really focusing on lately is the need to commission these energy storage systems. It is more complex to commission these systems than it is with solar. And one of the things that our clients realize and we try to get out to others is that if you're going to hit placed in service deadlines that fit within 3 or even your regular financing processes, the commissioning process needs to be started well ahead of time, and it does take some time and consideration because you're stitching together so many different parties in order to take a battery and make it operate economically on in a wholesale grid market like ISO New England or Cal ISO. So that's been a that's it's working well in that I think people are beginning to realize that. But because of the way the OB3 has changed the landscape in the US of foreign supplied battery equipment, some manufacturers, for example, have pulled back on their plans for building US teams, building US factories, all this kind of thing. And so as you reach this critical stage in your project where you're really rushing to meet all your timelines, the utilities waiting on you to finish things, et cetera, all of a sudden you find that your battery supplier took all of their commissioning teams except one and sent them back to China because they didn't want to be facing deportation risk. And now there's one team running around trying to commission all of this manufacturer's battery systems in an entire region of the country. So
Hmm,
you say,
wow.
so these, our federal policies do raise real challenges, and it makes the forethought and planning and such for things like commissioning so much more important.
Earlier, you had mentioned the increased complexity of these projects. How do you guys at Camelot keep up to date with all of these either regulatory changes, supply chain demands, moving employees, finding all that? How do you, in your office, working with clients, how do you track all of this?
It's a great question. And there's a few different answers to it. There's no single easy way to do it, but I would say that first of all, we try to bring in the best folks that we can who are already well connected in the industry and know what's happening. I've done a lot of work, for example, in the codes and standards side of energy storage. So I try to, sort of stay abreast of large scale fire testing and safety standards, things like that. We've got folks with development backgrounds, so they're really tuned into kind of how the wholesale markets are working and how what's happening on the supply chain side of things. But really, we have a lot of conversations and we try to share as much information through venues like this one as we can because, you know, I guess there's an argument to say, you should keep your secrets and your info close to your chest. But I would rather everybody knew about it and could make informed decisions. So I'd say frequent and open conversation is a key driver of staying on top of these things. But it is a lot happening.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot happening. So, talking about a lot happening, maybe in not the most ideal world, let's flip it. What challenges or frustrating events, maybe even time consuming practices you have going on inside of your business?
Mm. Yeah, I would say maybe an interesting one more than a frustrating one, but maybe relevant here is we are probably like everybody else, we are thinking hard about how to integrate AI and LLMs into our business. For Camelot, we are not a high volume, sort of templated work. We don't churn out single line diagrams all day. Our focus is really on bespoke service. And I think to the extent AI creates a lot of opportunities, I think just as humans, I feel that in many ways, the advent of AI has led me to feeling less connection with fellow humans and less of a sense of service from the companies I do business with. Who among us hasn't been stuck on hold with some irritating, AI prompts trying to get through to the pharmacist or whatever the case may be? And so at the same time we see the benefits of AI, it's really important to me that our clients feel that human to human connection and what I would call a white glove or bespoke service, because I feel like that is so lacking. So internally, it's a powerful tool to help us be more efficient. It speeds up our work. It is a force multiplier when used properly. But I think it's so important that, and this is how we view it, but I think it's so important that we take full ownership of everything we produce. And we always ensure that, it's checked, it's validated, all those kinds of things, both because it's necessary and that's our reputation, but also because we want our clients to realize I'd almost rather they saw a typo in something and knew it was made by a human than they didn't and said, "Oh, this is maybe AI generated." Because I want them to understand that they're really, it's us and them. It's a real relationship.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really valid points there in that in this adoption age of AI, we're all needing to kind of figure it out as we're moving along. No one's given us a handbook or like a game plan of like, oh, these are the options that you have. We're all kind of like stumbling through it. And I think the business owners always are looking for things to run smoother, be more revenue generating, but they also have legitimate concerns of not wanting to lose that human touch, which really usually separates okay companies from great companies. When the client management side of things and when clients are so thrilled with the results and how they've been treated. So it sounds like you at Camelot, that's a big emphasis for you as well.
It is. I guess the way I've described it to my team is that, excellent service is a little bit of a magic trick, right? How do you in every client conversation encourage that client to feel like they're the only thing you're doing that day? And that's the experience we want them to have, right? But it only happens if you've done preparation beforehand, you have processes in the background, like what your last conversation was about. All these kinds of things have to happen in the background to provide that kind of an experience to a client. And that's many of those are where AI can be helpful. I find my AI note takers are better at taking notes in meetings than I am, and that can be incredibly helpful. You can summarize past conversations quickly so they're right at your fingertips as you're speaking with somebody. My memory's not perfect. I hope none of my clients will listen and be upset to hear that I may not remember everything we talked about 6 months ago. But, using AI and such, I can cover for some of that deficiency, I suppose you'd say, in having an imperfect memory or whatnot.
Yeah, I think it's the right balance of applying the right human intelligence to the AI in order to be more effective in how we show up and be producing in our activities. And also, then our forward facing client interactions can be at a higher level, which is more professional but more effective to accomplishing goals. As we talk about clients, I'd love to hear one of your client success stories. Take us through a hero story of what Camelot's been able to do for a client and the results they ended up getting.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, no, I think one of the things that we come up with pretty frequently, is, especially these days and especially this year, is we'll have clients who come to us and say, "Hey, we're a solar developer. We've been building solar projects. We get that." But it's now become so obvious to us that we need to figure out energy storage. We know it's a thing. We're struggling to just get our feet under us and we have no time to waste. So one of the things that in this in this example, this is kind of a commercial scale solar developer. They mostly focused on the C&I kind of space, small utility scale, but not big stuff. Um, and so they came to us with this problem and we were flattered they did so and said, well, we have all of this expertise, but, we can't, rather than having us try to develop every project for you, let's teach, let's, as you say, teach you to fish. And so what we did for them is over the course of about 8 weeks, we gave them, I call it a boot camp. I have like an 8-hour energy storage boot camp that really works well for developers and such, where we talk about everything from technology to how markets and revenue streams work, how supply chains work. And you go from what's a battery to feeling pretty confident about in discussing it. And we then armed them with, geez, I think it was something like 40 or 50 different tools and resources, everything from sample contract exhibits, spreadsheet tools, checklists. Basically, I solar storage development in a box is how I would frame it. And so, a couple of months, I think it was literally 7 or 8 weeks after we started the engagement, they went from you don't know how to put a battery in our project to being able to sort of confidently go out and negotiate projects and develop projects. Not to say they never had questions or anything come up after that, but it really raised the confidence and just the level of fluency on their team to the point where they were then able to change their whole business and bring in all these new capabilities and opportunities. And that was great. That was a lot of fun. A lot of work to prepare all that, but yeah, it was a really great story that, they came out of that feeling of confidence, that feeling of empowerment. I want all of our clients, I want everyone in this industry to feel empowered in what they're doing and to bring that to a team. Very rewarding.
Hey, that's excellent. Curiosity, how do you acquire great clients like that? What's your client acquisition process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a flaming introvert for a start. The idea of cold calling and sales is not my happy place. But I think you can probably tell from the amount of waxing on I'm doing here. There's a little bit of an educator spirit in me, perhaps, and I've never been accused of being either brief or concise. But I think a lot of what we do to get people's attention and stuff is just give them information. I love writing white papers, doing webinars, articles, things like that, where I'll say, I'm not going to tell you how smart I am. I'm going to hopefully educate you a little bit about a topic, and you can reach your own conclusion about whether you think that, myself or my team are worth a follow up. So a lot of our interest has been driven by thought leadership. Webinars have gone great for us. White papers, I have to admit, I don't get as many people reading those as I might wish for after how long they take to write. Or either that, or nobody wants to sit around and read me waffling on for 10 pages about battery safety codes and standards. That could be it too. But yeah, that's been a big one for us. We're very active in the conference sort of show arena, industry events, things like that have been big for us. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Camelot was, working for a relatively small number of clients, all repeat business. And that was going fairly well. Things changed a little bit, and we realized like we needed to build up a whole process for business development almost from scratch. It was a little bit of a brown trousers kind of time for us because that was when I realized we didn't really have a process for business development. Up until that point in our first couple of years, it was somebody called Shawn and said they wanted to work together. We signed a contract and we went and did it. And I mistook that initially for a business development process, and it was not. But we got our act together very quickly. And now we have a kind of a multi-pronged approach that seems to work with folks. But we still try to limit the salesiness. It's still very much let's talk about your problem, and if you think that you might like to discuss a solution, we have a few ideas for you, and that resonates with folks. I don't want to be a used consulting salesman. I want to help people solve their problems, and if that's a mutually beneficial arrangement, then that's great.
I love it. And obviously by the success you guys have had, you've been able to accomplish that goal, which is fantastic. As we look towards moving to the finish line of this conversation, I want to get your input on what's your strategic priorities, let's say in the next 6 to 12 months, as you've adjusted to the new regulatory framework set up in 2025, moving into 2026. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, certainly in the near term, our focus is really on helping people with construction and commissioning because of these really, you know, challenging in some cases timelines that are tied to the declining tax credits. So in the short term, a lot of construction and commissioning work, especially for energy storage, with solar too. And in the, kind of the medium or the longer end of that range you mentioned, I think we're really focusing in on the energy storage supply chain because the what's called the foreign entity of concern or FIOC provisions really make a Chinese dominant battery supply chain challenging in the current tax credit environment. So a lot of our emphasis is, I think we're really one of the market leaders with the non-lithium ion battery technology space. So we do an awful lot of work with those companies and on projects related to those companies. So for example, we've done project design and economic modeling. We're one of the only folks that does economic modeling for some of these more novel battery chemistries. But it's really important because they don't quite operate the same way as lithium ion batteries do, and you can't model them the same way. So for folks that are earlier in their projects and considering what they're going to use for equipment, we are looking at doing a lot of work in terms of helping match them up with potential vendors that maybe they haven't quite thought of before or that might stretch their comfort zone. If they're used to building lithium ion, maybe now aqueous zinc is a good option. Maybe a flow battery is a good option when it wasn't before. Because for better or worse, we've thrown a hand grenade into simply buying the cheapest DC blocks from China that we can get and putting them on a site. That's not necessarily going to be the right answer in the next 2 years.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so following up with that, if you could wave a magic wand and automate, one or two aspects of your current workflow, what would that look like in order for you to achieve these goals?
Mhm. It's a great question. I would say a big part of the kind of the manual processes is automating, and we are trying to do this to some extent, but automating the reviews of large numbers of documents. We have a great partner that we're working with who runs a really AI oriented platform for managing transactions, for example. And that's great because when we do due diligence on an M&A transaction, a big time sink for us is your financial model has one P50 value in it, your amount of average electrical generation per year from your solar project. That number should match up in a bunch of other places, like your independent engineering report, other types of financial models, your power purchase agreement. All of those numbers should relate to one another. And, in sort of 2020 land, that meant going to those documents, maybe jotting down the number in each one and looking and saying, okay, they all match or they all don't. With automation, you can scan the whole thing and say, everywhere there's a P50, summarize that value and flag where they don't match this number. Or scan all of these transformer commissioning reports and compare them against this standard and tell me where any deviate. And you can very rapidly scan 100 commissioning reports or test reports and say these three have anomalies, and that can really focus in an engineer's time and say this is really where I need to be focusing is why was that dissolved gas analysis skipped or incorrect. So I think there's a lot that can be done to automate, and that's the kind of behind the scenes work I think where AI can really help if properly used.
Yeah, I would agree. Shawn, you've brought up some amazing insights on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know our audience will benefit a lot from it. As we move forward, I want to make sure the audience knows where to find you. They can reach out to you directly. Do you want to share where's the best place to do that?
Sure, happy to. So first of all, we're pretty active on LinkedIn. You can certainly find me there. And our website is www.camelotenergygroup.com. And feel free to send us a note through the website or info@camelotenergygroup.com. We'd love to hear from your audience.
Fantastic. And for everyone in the audience, of course, we'll have those links in the show notes. And for the audience, if you've enjoyed what you've heard here today, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with a colleague that wants to find out about the wonderful consulting services that Camelot offers. With that, we'll put another Blue Ocean Solutions podcast episode in the books. We thank you for your time. Shawn, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
See you, everybody.